Good evening, I'm Ian Hanomansing. Tonight, corporate intrigue and family drama. Edward Rogers wins in a BC court.
And that's what started this whole saga, now that he's in the driver's seat.
What it means for the company and for Canadians. Also tonight, a new timetable to lower Canada's flag as usual on Remembrance Day.
That's make my day. I think it's a great decision.
Proposed new COVID-19 treatments provide reasons for optimism.
The potential here is, this changes how we deal with this in the next year.
And the climate crisis through the eyes of 4 young people from 4 countries.
We're here trying to make our voices be heard.
From Glasgow and beyond, youth take the global stage. This is The National. The very public feud within a powerful Canadian family got even more fuel today with a court decision in BC. A judge ruling on who controls the country's biggest wireless carrier, Rogers Communications. That corporate drama wasn't confined to the boardroom. It pitted son against mother, sisters against brother. And today, the son and brother, Edward Rogers, won. Lindsay Duncombe looks at what it means for the family, the business, and many Canadians.
Moments before the court ruled, photographs of Edward Rogers appeared on the Reuters wire service, chairman of the board style, just in time to accompany the news that Edward's power play worked. He won. His lawyers left the court smiling.
No comments, thank you.
And Edward himself didn't revel in victory. I take no joy in the decision or the events of the past weeks, he said. The judgment confirms I acted appropriately. What he did was use his position as head of the family trust, which controls the voting shares, to reinstate himself as chair and appoint an Edward-friendly board after the board, including his mother and sisters, had ousted him. This battle among ultra-wealthy siblings is unprecedented in Canada because of the reach of the company. More than 10 million Canadians have Rogers cell phone plans, not to mention television stations, sports teams, naming rights on pro hockey rinks. But the public nastiness is what really makes it unusual. Martha Rogers has blasted her brother on Twitter. In a statement today, Edward's mother and 2 sisters said the ruling represents a black eye for good governance and shareholder rights, adding the company now faces a very real prospect of management upheaval and a prolonged period of uncertainty at perhaps the worst possible time. Management upheaval could mean the current CEO, Joe Natale, is out.
So now that he's in the driver's seat, I suspect that Joe Natale and probably several members of his senior management team will be shown the door, unfortunately.
And when the family mentions the timing, they're likely concerned about Rogers' $26 billion takeover of Shaw Communications, currently awaiting regulatory approval.
I think everyone involved wants certainty. They want certainty with respect to the Shaw transaction that's coming up.
And Lindsay, was this a result the business community expected?
Yes, the business community as well as legal experts said that they thought that Edward would come out ahead here, but they also said that this is the kind of decision that would only happen here in British Columbia because the rules are different here. In other provinces, there are more restrictions, Ian, on what someone who controls a family trust can do when it comes to making such significant changes.
And so what happens next year?
Well, we wait and see if the family and the company are going to appeal this decision that came out in Edward's favor. There was some indication in the courthouse today that that could happen. Lawyers for the company asked for an immediate stay while the appeal process potentially began. So they're at least thinking about that, although we're still waiting to find out exactly what they're going to do.
Lindsay Duncombe outside the BC Supreme Court tonight. The Trudeau government has laid out how it will honor veterans, even as flags at federal buildings are already at half-mast. Those flags lowered more than 5 months ago when unmarked graves at former residential schools were first discovered. As Remembrance Day drew closer, many wondered how Canada would acknowledge the sacrifice of soldiers. Olivia Stefanovic shows us the government's answer and the response.
After flying more than 5 months at half-mast, the maple leaf will rise this Sunday at sunset.
I think there was a sense that now is the time to do it, and this is a responsibility that we assume as the Government of Canada.
The announcement comes after lengthy talks with Indigenous peoples.
It was very honorary of Canada to lower their flags in remembrance of the mourning and the pain that many in this country were feeling.
A show of respect for survivors and children who never returned home from residential schools, following the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves in communities such as Cowessess First Nation.
We cannot forget that.
The government was under pressure to act. Flags needed to be raised so they could be lowered again on Remembrance Day next week.
Sir, that's make my day. I think it's a great decision.
This veteran, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, is glad to see a resolution.
To have the occasion to bring everybody together, remember that the liberty have a price.
The move is also being welcomed by the Assembly of First Nations.
We wanted to find that path forward.
The national chief had called on Ottawa to fly an Every Child Matters flag alongside the maple leaf across the country. The government says it will instead make space on Parliament Hill for a survivors flag from the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation.
That to us is really important, that action is going to come out of this, not just a symbolic gesture.
The government says it will work faster to meet the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and says that from now on, the Canadian flag will be lowered to half-mast every September 30th in memory of all the children forced to attend residential schools. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
Those discoveries of unmarked graves at or near the sites of former residential schools has increased the calls for the Catholic Church to apologize and to take financial responsibility. One focal point is the expected visit of Pope Francis. Jason Warwick has more.
For Chief Felix Thomas, Wanuskewin Heritage Park is sacred territory.
This has been a gathering place for 6,000 years.
It's also one of the sites proposed for the possible papal visit announced last week by the Vatican. No date has been set. If Pope Francis does come to Canada, Thomas and others are hoping to hear the long-awaited apology for the Catholic Church's role in the residential school system. But they want more than that.
It's just words unless it's accompanied by meaningful action. And if you say you're sorry but nothing changes, what good does that serve?
Advocates say the Catholic Church still owes survivors about $60 million from a 2005 settlement deal, about the same amount as recent papal visits. The last one to Canada in 2002 cost $67 million. Brazil in 2013 was $100 million, and Panama 2 years ago cost $67 million.
One Vatican expert says that if Pope Francis does come to Canada, survivors will get that apology that they're looking for. But if they're seeking something more, like compensation or document disclosure, they're likely to be disappointed.
They are always worried about not only what it looks like to the rest of the world, and worried also legitimately about the survivors in this terrible tragedy, but they're also watching to make sure that they aren't paying for it financially. That's been their MO for hundreds of years. If Francis broke that, it would be stunning, but it's unlikely.
The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops says it's restarted the fundraising campaign for survivors, aiming to raise $30 million in the next 5 years. Bishops say they hope to work out details of Pope Francis's visit when they travel to the Vatican next month with Indigenous leaders, and no money raised for survivors will go toward the papal tour. Thomas says there's still time for the Catholic Church to do the right thing. He says survivors deserve nothing less. Jason Warwick, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Hundreds of Afghans are in danger tonight, many of them once employed by the Canadian military. They've been sheltering in privately funded safe houses, but that money has run out. And as Ellen Morrow explains, without help from the Canadian government, those Afghans will be on the street and vulnerable to the Taliban.
Abdul, a former interpreter for the Canadian military, was forced out of a Kabul safe house today. The deep fears he has for his family's safety now multiplied.
Absolutely, they're gonna kill them or assassinate my family because they're looking for the revenge. I'm in the worst place, no one can help us.
This video of a safe house was provided to the Fifth Estate, a network of facilities like this one run by 2 Canadian NGOs helping nearly 2,000 Afghans is now almost completely shuttered. The donations they relied on drying up, their pleas to the federal government for funding growing louder. Keenan Walper served near Kandahar and is now operations officer at Aman Lara, one of the organizations behind the Safe House network.
My belief in the value system of our current government, it's shaken. It really is. And all the good intentions are starting to sound like they're pacifying statements.
Ottawa has provided some funding to private organizations like Aman Lara in the past, but citing security concerns, it won't let any of the money be used to run safe houses. Last month, in an interview with the Fifth Estate, the former immigration minister promised more money for private groups was coming.
We are in the process of finalizing that funding.
But no update on that pledge was provided in response to CBC News requests today. Retired Major General David Fraser, who commanded Canadian and NATO troops in southern Afghanistan, says Canada is not heeding its moral responsibility.
It'll leave us in a quagmire ourselves as a nation that believes in hope and opportunity, and we didn't deliver it to these people in their time of need.
Abdul says his family can afford a hotel for about a week. Then, like so many others, they'll have nowhere to go.
To Prime Minister, Mr. Justin Trudeau, if he is hearing our voice, please don't let me in us.
Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
New Brunswick has issued an emergency order for the province's 9,000 striking healthcare workers to go back to work. It came after this union rally and news conference crashed by Premier Blaine Higgs.
In a different format, but the same dollars as was provided a week ago as a counter from Mr. Dross. Mr. Dross, would that be correct?
Is that when you walked away from the table and didn't respond to our offer?
That's when we broke talks down, yes. But would that be correct?
The strike began October 29th. The back-to-work order doesn't cover those outside of healthcare, including school staff and jail guards. Health Canada released its latest modeling on the pandemic, the trajectory of Canada's infections still heading down. For Dr. Teresa Tam, always cautious, there was a note of optimism.
I am looking forward to seeing less massive upswings in widespread areas.
The projection for the winter is perhaps some bumps in case rates, not the big waves of the past year, but that could be derailed by a new variant, for example, or changing some public health measures too soon. The modeling emphasized the effectiveness of vaccines, but the headline grabber today concerned new treatments. Pfizer announcing its anti-coronavirus pill is almost 90% effective at preventing hospitalizations from COVID. Christine Birak looks into that claim.
Pfizer is calling its take-home pill a game changer. It doesn't protect people like a vaccine, but can prevent high-risk patients from ending up in hospital beds.
The very high efficacy comes even to us as a surprise, exceeds our most visionary expectations we had for that.
Pfizer hasn't released its data for review, but says its drug showed an 89% reduction in risk of COVID-19 related hospitalization or death against a placebo in patients treated within 3 days of symptom onset.
The potential here is, this changes how we deal with this in the next year.
A similar treatment made by Merck was approved yesterday in the UK. This cancer patient was among the first to get it.
It is absolutely a life and death situation. I do have a family that I need to think about, and I need to be here for them.
Merck's antiviral reportedly cuts the risk of severe illness by 50% when given within 5 days of symptoms. But doctors say it won't be easy to start patients on either drug within days of feeling symptoms.
That's going to be the biggest challenge, particularly because in those first 5 days, people actually feel fairly well comparatively.
and there could be side effects. Merck's drug works by introducing genetic errors into the virus's genetic code. Some researchers are questioning the potential risks, and doctors note Pfizer's antiviral contains a booster medication that's known to interfere with other drugs.
These aren't straightforward, go take this pill and come back and see how you're doing. These will have to be monitored pretty closely.
If approved, the U.S. says it's already secured millions of doses. The company hasn't submitted an application in Canada yet, but Merck has. Health officials say they're still reviewing Merck's data and wouldn't offer any timelines. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
In Germany, health officials are making a renewed vaccine push, including an expanded booster program, as the country grapples with a new wave of COVID cases. More than 37,000 new infections were reported today, and that topples the previous record, which was set just yesterday. Officials say more than 30% of Germans are still not fully inoculated against the virus. At the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, the week capped off with a large protest. Thousands of young activists taking to the streets to demand more action from leaders, among them Greta Thunberg and some Canadians. The CBC's Tessa Arsenault was there as well.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it?
Small but powerful voices. Thousands of climate activists have come from far and wide to march through the streets of Glasgow, making impassioned calls for radical change and urgent action from those in power. Leila Cantave and Alison Doyle-Braithwaite came all the way from Canada. Armed with what they call their community's lived experiences, they say they want climate justice.
The indigenous communities in Canada don't have access to proper water. There's no reason for some people to have access to clean water. I'm in the same country and my water has a level of contamination that's not okay.
Alison lives less than 16 kilometers from the Pickering nuclear power plant. She's calling for a transition to renewable energy.
It's kind of a problem when I have to have these pills sent to me that if the power plant exploded or anything else, I have to take those or else I will die, like the whole community. And I think that's outrageous. Like, why us?
Among the crowd, a familiar face.
We don't need any more empty promises.
The young Swedish activist Greta Thunberg receiving a rock star welcome, as she called COP26 a failure for its lack of drastic action.
People here believe that there is power in mass movement, but they also know that there's only so much they can do as individuals. Change, they say, should come from the top. Policy changes that will in turn change the system.
1 week into the summit, governments have pledged to phase out coal-fired plants, end deforestation, and defund fossil fuel projects, among other promises. Canada committed to capping oil and gas emissions. But those in the streets say they've heard it all before. What they want now is change. Tessa Arsenault, CBC News, Glasgow.
And ahead tonight, we're going to go beyond the headlines with several young people who were there.
We're here trying to tell our government what is really happening in our country because no one is taking anything serious. Everything is
What they want world leaders to know and why it was so important for them to be at COP26. That conversation is coming up a little later. Fighting climate change also means acting locally. For some young activists, that means talking about it in school and pushing for a better climate education curriculum. Deanna Sumanag-Johnson spoke with those who are leading that charge.
We will be sequestering.
She might not be as famous as Greta Thunberg yet, but 16-year-old Aishwarya Putur is also busy educating the adults around her about climate change.
The objective is...
She's part of Teach the Teacher, an international initiative where students sit down with their teachers and, in her case, talk about filling the gaps on climate education in school.
Every single activist I know has learned more about climate change through articles, through news, through researching, through going to libraries, but not everyone has those resources, right? So climate education itself is a privilege, and it shouldn't be one.
In Calgary, 15-year-old Subhashini Thangadurai feels the same way. She is part of a youth environmental group that made recommendations to Alberta's Ministry of Education.
The climate education that I've had through school has been very limited, nearly none. The mentions about climate change are very few, and they're normally in textbooks that are quite outdated.
Environmental curriculum varies by province and is not taught consistently across the country. But researchers have found the quality of climate education doesn't only depend on where you live, but also on individual teachers and schools.
Some provinces have a focus in science courses, and then another province will have a whole bunch of their expectations actually in social studies courses.
Another discovery, much of the current focus is strictly on the impact of climate change and not solutions, leaving many students feeling powerless or anxious. That's what the Gaia project is trying to tackle through hands-on projects it brings to schools in New Brunswick.
Getting kids to take on action projects that help fight climate change is a great way to alleviate that anxiety and create a positive change at their school.
A way to give students tools to help change and not just fret about a defining crisis of their generation. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
A member of the Alberta cabinet says he's stepping down to deal with problems with alcohol. In a statement, Devin Dreeshen says his conduct has become an issue for the government. CBC News has been investigating allegations about his drinking. The Premier says that Dreeshen's statement stands for itself.
Political life is a very social activity, but people should be mature and responsible in terms of consuming alcohol, especially in any kind of a workplace environment.
Dreeshen is named in a lawsuit against the Premier's office by a former government staffer. A high-profile murder trial is now underway in the U.S. 3 white men accused of murdering an unarmed black man in Georgia. Next, the serious concerns about the jury, who must now decide why Ahmaud Arbery was killed.
I was very shocked that we only had one black African-American man. And I mean, it's devastating.
The New Brunswick First Nation using wind power to transform its community.
We got people moving home. This is really good for us.
And ABBA is back on top of the charts. Here they go again. We're back in 2. Queen Elizabeth has reportedly left Windsor Castle for a weekend visit to Sandringham, north of London. This comes in the midst of an extended doctor-prescribed resting period for the Queen following a night in hospital last month. U.S. President Joe Biden joined former Presidents Obama and Bush and hundreds of mourners at today's funeral service for Colin Powell, the first Black Secretary of State. Powell died last month from complications from COVID. He was 84 years old. The trial of 3 men accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery began today. The 25-year-old was shot in February of 2020, something the jury heard clearly in court today, and you'll hear clearly as well. Susan Ormiston looks at the case.
Who killed Ahmaud Arbery is not the question, it's why. A distressing video shows the road where Greg McMichael and his son Travis in their truck chased Arbery, cornering him, then shooting 3 times. The prosecution says it was racially motivated.
Because Greg McMichael told the police this: "Stop or I'll blow your head off." That's what he said to Mr. Arbery.
Arbery was on a run in a neighborhood 3 kilometers from his home. Surveillance video shows him entering a house under construction, empty. He'd been there before. The McMichaels saw him, say they believed he was scouting the house for valuables, and took up pursuit, joined by Roddy Bryan.
4 times Mr. Ryan tries to hit him with his pickup truck. Greg McMichael said it perfectly. Mr. Arbery was trapped like a rat. That's what he told the police.
The defense will argue the McMichaels were trying to make a citizen's arrest and that Arbery, even without a weapon and under pursuit, was a threat.
That Travis McMichael, honestly and lawfully, attempted to detain Ahmaud Arbery according to the law and shot and killed him in self-defense.
The killing last year shocked Georgians. The men were charged only after the video was leaked and 2 months after the killing.
If I could please have you stand and raise your right hand.
And only 1 African American was chosen for the jury in a county which is more than 25% black.
This court has found that there appears to be intentional discrimination.
The judge still ruled the case could go forward.
I was very shocked that we only had 1 black African American man. I mean, it's devastating.
Arbery's mother wept in court today, watching her son's last moments alive. And that citizen's arrest law circa 1863 was overhauled after Arbery died. But since it applied at the time, the accused can use it in their defense. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
When we come back, the young people fighting to be heard at COP26. Next, we'll go beyond the headlines with 4 young people from around the world who traveled to Glasgow, why they say they need to be there, and later, why your medicine could actually be contributing to greenhouse gases.
is not a secret that COP26 is a failure. What will it take for the people in power to wake up?
That's Greta Thunberg sharing her message with other youth climate activists in Glasgow today. As we mentioned earlier in the program, thousands of young people from around the world took to the streets in protest, calling out world leaders for the lack of action inside the walls of COP26. So tonight we wanted to go beyond the headlines with 4 climate activists who were there today and have been in Glasgow all week. Sadie Vipond is from Calgary, Leonie Bremer, Germany, Sofia Gutierrez is from Colombia, and Jaka Pita Kandaga from Namibia. I spoke to them earlier. Well, thanks to all of you for staying up late and agreeing to speak with us here. And Leonie, let me start with you. What's it like to be a young climate activist at COP26?
You know, we came here as Fridays for Future because we don't believe that the leaders will really change the system, but the people on the streets, the people power, this will change the system. The people here are walking around like headless chicken, like planless, and are not achieving anything. But we are here, the Fridays for Future activists, really demanding the system change.
Jacopita, what about you? What's the experience been like there?
For me, I basically just feel like it's been, how must I say? It's been good to be here, especially thinking that we have had previous COPs before. I honestly felt like even previous years following up with the COP, I felt like world leaders, they come here, they discuss things, but then they really don't implement their policies when they go back to their country. So I feel like as Fridays for Future MAPA and Fridays for Future International, we are just here to put pressure on our world leaders to make the right decisions at the COP and to make sure that they follow through with the policies that they implement. Yeah.
Sophia, what about you?
For me, it's a privilege to be here. And I'm here alongside with all our different 7 Colombian youth. But we are here out of privilege. We're here, but a lot of the Colombians are still in Colombia fighting and defending their territory in the front lines. We're here trying to make our voices be heard. We're here trying to tell our government what is really happening in our country, because no one is taking anything serious. Everything is presenting these amazing plans, but they're forgetting about the people in their countries. They're forgetting about the human rights of their people. So for me, it's a privilege to be here, and I hope that in the next COP, actually the decision-making processes includes the voice of those most affected.
Sadie, you're the Canadian in our group, and the only reason you're not sitting next to the other 3 activists is just the logistics of the buildings and the locations there. But I will ask you the same question, which is, what is it like to be a young climate activist at COP26?
It feels really empowering, really like I'm part of something bigger than myself. I am here to share my opinion and point of view on how our leaders have to look at the youth when making these big decisions.
So all 4 of you have in common that you are climate activists, that you are young people, but you're from different parts of the world. And Jacopita, you're from Namibia. Tell me, tell our Canadian audience, is there a particular environmental issue that is driving your activism?
Honestly, thank you for that specific question. One of a particular environmental issue that really drove me here was the situation of oil drilling and exploration in Namibia. Namibia is a very semi-arid area, and we really suffer from water scarcity. And one of the places that we really have water in is like the Okavango Delta. But then for some reason, Recon Africa, a Canadian company by the way, and our government, they are trying to drill for oil in this area, and it's a very delicate area because it has so much, it has water, it has all these ecosystems, and a lot of people depend on this area. So I feel like one of the reasons why I'm here today is just to fight to save the Okavango Delta and to stop like the oil exploration in this area.
As I understand it, you have been involved, all of you have been involved in demonstrations in Glasgow and in your home countries as well. And Sophia, I'm told that in Colombia, it can be dangerous to be involved in demonstrations. Tell us a little bit about that and why you continue to be part of visible protest back home.
We have two scenarios. So the first scenario is those of us who can dream of going back home after a protest, those of us who can try to get home after being in a hot zone. In a hot zone, I mean police brutality and people disappearing, gas getting in near us, into our eyes, into our skin, and that's a privilege for us. That's the privilege of a protest, to be in a protest and dreaming of going back home. But for those in the front lines, they don't have that privilege because the war is in their homes. The conflict is directly in their houses, and if they don't answer to, like, if they react, they can get killed.
Sadie, you're just 15 years old. Any surprises for you at COP26?
Well, it's been all very overwhelming, and I have been learning so much, and I have met so many inspiring people, and yeah, I'm just here to talk to anyone who wants to talk to me and learn as much as I can, and it's a really, really unique experience.
And Leonie, let me finish with this. You've been involved in the environmental movement for relatively long time. You have some experience. I mean, you're obviously quite young still. Realistically, what do you hope will come out of your involvement and the other people who are at the table, their involvement at COP26?
You know, we are talking so much about system change and listening to indigenous people, listening to most marginalized people. But what we see here at COP especially is that white people are in the power positions saying that they will do something about the climate. But literally, if we want to change the system, which we need to solve the climate crisis, we need to have MAPA, most affected people and areas, marginalized people in power position. Otherwise, we would copy the same mistakes, and this would just replicate the system that has led to the crisis.
Well, thanks to all of you for speaking to our Canadian audience and for explaining your perspective on COP26. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
A new wind farm in New Brunswick is not only providing sustainable energy, it has transformed a First Nation.
We got people moving home. This is really good for us.
Next, why this is about so much more than electricity. But first, from familiar tunes to new songs,
and my hands are shaking.
This is kind of unreal.
ABBA is the name of the game. The group is back with a 10-track album almost 40 years after they split up.
It's emotionally very difficult to grasp, actually, that we did what we did.
Voyage was released today. It's already on top of the iTunes charts. Along with the new album, there'll be a series of concerts, though the stars won't be appearing in person. Their performance will be digital. And when all is said and done, the excitement might be short-lived.
I've said that's it. You know, I don't want to do another ABBA album. But I mean, I'm not alone in this. There are four of us.
Fans can hope. Welcome back. New Brunswick First Nation is making money harnessing the wind. A project with turbines that produces enough power to power 5,000 homes, but it's delivering even more than that to residents. Rachel Cave shows us the project and its impact.
For me, wind energy it's the way of the future. As the world changes, as climate change picks up, we're going to be forced to move away from greenhouse gases and oil and any kind of energy that emits carbon. So having the opportunity to do a project like this is something that I was happy to be a part of, and that I'm proud that we were able to complete it, and it's something that my community can be proud of. All right, now that everybody's seen. When I was first elected chief, at that time we were a broke community. We were in third-party management. Nobody wanted to do business with us. Banks didn't want to lend us money. So we were in a tough position, and it seemed like there was no hope. Probably about a month or two into my first term as chief, I got a call from one of our community members, which is also a consultant. And he said, "Look, Chief, there's this renewable energy company. They're looking for partners to bid on a program through MB Power for wind energy. They want an Indigenous partner. Are you interested?" So I said, "Yeah, I'm interested."
In 2015, Natural Forces was looking around the province for First Nation partnerships. In our search, we found Chief Ross and his council. They were also looking to get into the green energy space. And so that was the start of a great relationship, which has now culminated in 6 years later into a wind farm.
My name's Tana Perry. I'm the band manager for Nagokuk First Nation, also known as Tobic First Nation.
How does it feel to be here today?
It's a mixture of emotions, from ecstatic to happy to a relief, and it's been a whirlwind, pun intended. This revenue is going to go back into our community and feed those gaps that are there now and allow us to flourish and say, now we can put a housing plan into place that's going to fit the needs of our community. We can now put a water treatment plant in place that's going to fit the needs of our community long term for the next 30 years.
This is a newly grubbed area that will be the first phase of a planned 200-unit subdivision that will help address our homeless needs here in the community.
How would you describe the demand for housing right now here?
Right now, our backlog is over 200.
Families?
Yes, yeah.
Waiting for a place to live?
Waiting for a place to live.
What are they doing in the meantime?
They're doubling up in homes. They're staying with family members.
What does that do to a community in terms of spiritual health?
I'm sure it contributes to a lot of the other problems that we have within the community, because if you don't have a good place to lay your head down or come home and do your homework or a place to invite your friends over after school, it's a hereditary, you know, it's an ongoing problem.
When did Tobic go into third-party management, and when did they come out? Do you know those exact?
Yep.
Okay.
2007.
2007.
And we came out in 2000. We were there 12 years. Everything got just shut right down. It set us back 12 years. So what this team has really done is set a path forward in a good way. I mean, you've seen a lot of the new builds that are going up. So we got people moving home. This is really good for us, right? Like, there's so much activity. This wasn't here 6 years ago, Rachel, when I got here.
We've always struggled with funding gaps from federal, provincial governments. It's never going to be enough, and I don't think it will ever be enough to provide for our communities, the needs of our communities. So the only way to get around that is to build a economic revenue producer and try and build our own source revenue to a point where we don't have to always rely on federal and provincial funding to meet the needs of our community. Put it this way, the community should see, on an annual basis, $800,000 to $1.2 million a year. And our community is going to be receiving those returns for 30 years, way past beyond my tenure.
Next, the push for greener healthcare options. Why an hour-long medical procedure could compare to driving hundreds of kilometers. We'll be right back. In a week where so much attention has been paid to the major sources of greenhouse emissions, we also wanted to highlight a source you may be less familiar with, medicines and treatments so many of us use. Lauren Pelly explains.
From anesthetic gases to certain inhalers, medical care can produce a surprising amount of emissions.
We know that healthcare contributes about 5% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions in total, so we can do a lot within healthcare to lower those emissions.
This week, international anesthesiologists released a consensus statement calling on anesthesia providers to use gases with the lowest global warming potential.
We use this to either deliver oxygen and/or anesthetic gases.
This Toronto anesthesiologist says some commonly used gases are falling out of favor.
For those that are environmentally inclined, one would want to choose the least offensive to the environment, because of course we use these all day, every day.
Here's how two anesthetic gases compare. An hour using desflurane equals a roughly 370-kilometer car trip. Swapping to an hour of sevoflurane is like a 50-kilometer ride instead. Or, in some cases, medical teams can opt for intravenous anesthetics instead. This physician says patients can also have a say in reducing emissions tied to their care.
For Canadians who use inhalers, so there's a couple things you can do to reduce the impact of the inhaler on the climate.
For one thing, she says you can ask your doctor about switching from a metered dose inhaler to a dry powder inhaler. And
if you have an inhaler, make sure you've had proper breathing studies that show what your diagnosis is. If you don't have a diagnosis and you're puffing away when you, for example, have a cold, that's probably not a very good reason for puffer use.
All small changes, but climate-minded physicians hope they add up to a big impact. Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
Next, the Vancouver Canucks sport some new festive apparel.
I just wanted to represent like the imagery that I grew up around when it came to Diwali.
So the Diwali-inspired jerseys and the BC artist who designed them is our moment. After this. An artist from Pitt Meadows, British Columbia, was asked to design a Diwali-inspired special edition jersey for the Vancouver Canucks. And tonight, the artist got to see the team wear them on the ice, and that is our moment.
They contacted me about 2 months ago saying that they were doing a Diwali celebration. When I found out it was for a warm-up jersey, like, excitement went through the roof. Like, there's no way I would have said no to this. When I was younger, like around 10 years old, that was when peak of my obsession was. We used to watch all the Canucks games, and now to be working with them as an adult, it's so cool. I just wanted to represent like the imagery that I grew up around when it came to Diwali. For them to be seeing our art and our culture on such a big scale, I think that's so important. Being represented, it helps take away like the otherness that we often feel. It just feels great that people are being recognized right now. Seth Rogen was tweeting about the jersey last night, which is crazy. Like, he knows I exist now. That's wild. I don't even have words to explain my excitement level. Like, it's just mind-boggling what is happening.
It feels like a lot is changing quickly in hockey before the Canucks games, and I think this is happening elsewhere as well. There's a land acknowledgement on video that gets a huge cheer, and now Seth Rogen, Diwali, and the Canucks, that is peak Vancouver for sure. And that is the National for November the 5th. Join me Sunday for Cross Country Checkup on CBC Radio 1, and later that evening, I'll be back here for the National. Good night.